My name is Julie Womack. I am the head of organizing for Red Wine and Blue. We are really, really thrilled to welcome Heather Booth. She is one of the country's leading strategists about progressive issue campaigns and driving issues in elections. She started organizing in the civil rights and women's movements in the 1960s. She started Jane. Some of you all may have heard of that. It's an underground abortion service that was before Roe. There's actually a new HBO documentary about it called The Janes, and a Hollywood film version, and we talked a lot about that last year, called Call Jane. She's the founding director and now the president of the Midwest Academy, training social change leaders and organizers. She's been involved in many, many political campaigns, director of the NAACP National Voter Fund. Yeah, honestly, you guys, I have so many things I could read about Heather that I might just let her go through her entire background for all of that. But I will say that I was so thrilled to get introduced to Heather, and I have talked to many amazing and inspiring people, but I have never had somebody tell me that if you want to learn more, there is not one but two documentaries about my life. So I thought that that was quite amazing. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather now, and then I'll come back and have a little Q&A in just a few minutes. Yeah, turn it over
Well,
to
what
you,
is
Heather.
really amazing is Red Wine and Blue. I have so looked forward to being part of your community. I want to be Red Wine and Blue along with you. You are so impactful. I actually had heard about the creation even before it was really started, when I knew Katie Paris as she was moving back home. And what you have built, that map and how it's populating, you are the people who are helping to change the world. And both the Julies who provided the introduction on tonight's session, you are true organizers. And I view that as one of the highest things you can say about someone, highest praise you can give someone, that they are an organizer for freedom and justice and a better world. Right now, it's particularly important because we really are on a knife's edge in this country. And it's a knife's edge between freedom and authoritarian rule, an authoritarian rule that could be hateful, chaotic, even violent prone. But there's also the promise of a better world, depending on what we do. Our freedoms are at stake, the most intimate decision in a person's life about when or whether or if we have a child. That freedom is at stake. The freedom to parent as we want to parent and make sure that our kids can learn accurate history as we would like them to make decisions for themselves in their own lives. The freedom to vote, the freedom to thrive. And we find that it's all threatened, but it all depends on what we do. And if we organize with love at the center, we have changed this world and we will change this world. And you, Red Wine and Blue, you can change this world. I often wear a heart pendant because I do believe we need love at the center, working from our values. Now, I learned this lesson first when I was in the civil rights movement. In 1964, I joined the Freedom Summer Project. Many of you heard about that because it's when Northern students were recruited to support very courageous African Americans in Mississippi who were being terrorized when they were just trying to register to vote or live a decent life. And by the way, during that summer, show you, here's two pictures. One, this is a picture of me. I'm playing the guitar. I'm 18 years old. I'm at the home of Fannie Lou Hamer. It may be a little hard to see the picture. Some of you may have heard her name. She was a great civil rights heroine. And here's a picture of me at a voter registration drive in Bolivar County, Mississippi. And that picture was taken moments before I was arrested with others, simply because we were trying to support people registering to vote. And during that summer, many of you may have heard that there were 3 of the young volunteers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, who were killed at the hands of the Klan. But within a year, we won the Voting Rights Act, and it transformed county after county and really helped to transform this country. Even when things seem most hopeless, we can make change when we organize with love at the center. And in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that was the organization I was part of, we talked about building a beloved community. Now, I returned to Chicago, where I was at school, and a friend of mine said his sister was pregnant and nearly suicidal and needed an abortion. Could I help out? I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't really ever discussed the issue before. It was a much more innocent time, and I may have been a more innocent person, but I said I'd do what I could to help. So I went to the medical arm of the civil rights movement called the Medical Committee for Human Rights, and I found a remarkable doctor, Dr. T.R.M. Howard. We should know his name too. There are many men of goodwill that join us. He performed the procedure. I didn't know that he had been a civil rights leader in Mississippi and came to Chicago when his name appeared on a Klan death list. He performed the procedure, it was successful, and I thought that that was the end of it for me, that I had done a good deed for a friend in need. But word must have spread and someone else called, and I made that arrangement with Dr. Howard. And then word must have spread and someone else called. And I realized that if the calls kept coming in, I better create a system. And because 3 people talking about abortion in 1965 in Chicago was a conspiracy to commit a felony, we decided to keep it a little quiet and say, pregnant, don't want to be, call Jane. Now, there's much more to the story. And as Julie mentioned, there is a film, a documentary about it called The Janes, nominated for 3 Emmys, won 3 Emmys. But over time, I recruited other women to provide what we call the service. And those women learned how to provide the abortions themselves. And between 1965 and 1973, when Roe became the law of the land, the women of Jane performed 11,000 safe and caring abortions, but it wasn't legal. Until people organized, and because we organized, we won Roe. We elected those officials in the Senate and in the presidency who could nominate people to a Supreme Court, who could know what justice really is. And we can do it again when we organize with love at the center, as Red, Wine, and Blue does. So I thank you all. I'm so glad to be with you tonight and look forward to the conversation.
Okay, 1 second. I'm going to spotlight myself again so we can come up here and have a chat. Okay, well, thank you so much, Heather, for sharing that piece of your history. There was somebody in the chat asking if you can still play the guitar and if you'd play it tonight. So
my kids play the guitar and some of the grandkids are musicians, but I'm not playing the guitar very much these days. I enjoy it when others play.
Well, I know that obviously the history of the Janes and everything that you set up there is of great interest to our women as we are now fighting for reproductive freedoms again in this country. But I know you have even a larger story than that. So can you just give us a little more of a background? You know, what did you do after the 60s, after Roe was passed? You know, how did you stay involved, and what drove that passion to stay involved with organizing?
Well, to some extent, it was just events in my life. At one point, I had 2 little kids, 2 kids under the age of 3, and we needed childcare. I was returning to work, as many others were. I was a teacher at that point. And there was no city-funded childcare. And we tried to set up a childcare center in the church basement across from my house, and we're told they're not allowed to build childcare centers in church basements because the licensing codes had been designed to only benefit 2 large contractors who wanted to build whole new centers. So we organized a group called the Action Committee for Decent Childcare, and organizing across the city, across race, across religion, across background, people who had never come together before. We won $1 million for childcare when $1 million was real money. This is about 1978. And We won a change in the childcare licensing, and we built the Sojourner Truth Childcare Center that I think still exists to this day. So some of it was from personal needs, but some of it was also realizing there are just issues in the world. I was working at a job, and one of the clerical workers was terribly mistreated, and she was crying. She was going to quit. And I said, don't quit. We have a reasonable employer. I hoped we could bring some issues to him, and maybe we could resolve it. On seeing the issues, he felt, you're not going to raise any issues with me. And I was fired for union organizing. I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. But 2.5 years later, I won a back pay suit. And with that, I started the training center, Midwest Academy, that now has trained thousands of organizers, and in many of the skills that Red Wine and Blue now teaches. And from there, I went on and used those skills. I was the director of a campaign for financial reform that Elizabeth Warren headed up, and we won the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that's returned billions of dollars to consumers that they were defrauded from. And we won that because we organized. I became the director of an early immigration reform organization. I worked on healthcare. In fact, if you name an issue, it's quite likely that I was recruited or worked on those issues. And then what's interesting, I had been kind of anti-electoral. I felt a lot of it is corrupt. I didn't want to be part of a Democratic or Republican Party in Mississippi, which was very corrupted in the 1960s. And I thought, well, I wasn't going to do electoral politics. And then in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected, I realized that many of the issues that we cared about were being pushed back. And I realized that if you don't do politics, as a friend said to me, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. I learned a lot about politics and went into a number of elections, and now work on the issues based on my values and can also drive them into the electoral arena.
Well, that's why when I was doing your intro that I said it was almost too hard to say everything that you've done, because I don't think there was an issue you had not worked on. I would love to ask you, based on your experience, and you mentioned other badass women like Elizabeth Warren, at the time you were doing all of this organizing, this wasn't exactly a time where women were viewed as leaders. I mean, we've still trying to break that glass ceiling in so many ways. How did you overcome that hurdle of just, dealing with the misogyny that you probably, not probably, that you faced in this work?
There was I'll tell you one incident that happened, and there are many. I was talking in a group, and while I'm talking, one of the guys says, shut up. I was so shocked. This isn't how you treat anyone. And so after I was done talking, I went around to all the women in the group and tapped them on the shoulder and said, let's leave this group and go upstairs. And we founded what was probably the first campus-based women's organization in the country. And so we faced discrimination. However, I also think that what sometimes holds us back is our own belief that we are not good enough, that we don't know enough, that we're not smart enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not tall enough, we're not thin enough. We're not enough. And everything in the society tells people, particularly women, people of color, young people, and really many people, you're not good enough. But what I've realized is that we are more than enough. I think it's what Gloria Steinem said. We are the leaders we have been waiting for. But sometimes on our own, we have insecurities. I have many insecurities. I'm actually quite an insecure person. I was a little scared about coming before Red Wine and Blue. My goodness, you're a national organization all over the country. Would I be good enough? And what I realize is it's when we build community, sometimes over that glass of wine, when we come together, that's when we find the confidence. And so building the community with love at the center It's one of the reasons I love red wine and blue. And it's also a way that we can advance and can learn together and can make change.
Well, and I love about everything you're saying is 100%. I agree that what we're trying to do is when you organize with love, when you build that community of people, that's when you're the strongest. And that's really what we try to teach with red wine and blue. I do want to ask you though, so you've talked about starting the Janes and the pre-Roe era, and now we're in an era where we're seeing, I mean, I would categorize it as an attempt to control women's bodies, to push us back to that time where we didn't have that freedom. Um, Based on what you went through in the past and what you see today, what is your take on this situation? How would you compare the past to the current state that we're in?
Well, in part, we have to realize we have made progress. There's such a pushback on what we've achieved that you feel like, oh my God, does it make any difference? But we have made progress. I'll tell you another story. When I was in college, a friend of mine was raped at knife point in her bed in off-campus housing. We went to student health to get a gynecological exam, and she was told student health didn't cover gynecological exams. And more than that, she was given a lecture on her promiscuity, just to get a sense of how far we've come. Of course, now student health would cover gynecological exams. It would be required that all students, including women, would be covered for our needs, and that rather than being given a lecture on promiscuity, we'd be given supportive counseling. There might be a rape crisis center on campus. Many changes have happened because we organized. Now, it's also true we have much further to go. Just earlier this week, March 12th, was Equal Pay Day. And it's called Equal Pay Day because it would take women that much longer till March 12th of this year to make a salary equal to what men would make at the beginning of the year, from last year to the beginning of this year. Now, that pay gap has lessened a bit, but it's been mostly steady for almost the last 20 years. So there's much further to go in many areas. And I'd say further, the biggest thing that's changed is that we have changed. There is now red wine and blue. You are now amongst the leaders of this fabulous group. Just think of the people around on this Zoom call and the lives you'd led. Oh, I saw one question there said, is it a white women's equal pay day? Yes, but each category of women by race, it's even worse. It's an equal pay day recognizing that the gap for Black women is even greater, for Latino women, for Native American women, for Asian Pacific women, Asian Pacific Islanders. So all of us have some things in common and also struggles we need to carry on for our particular needs. Thanks for raising that question. But yes, we've made progress and also have much further to go.
You mentioned, and I agree with you, that we are on the kind of knife's edge of authoritarianism. You've obviously gone through lots of struggles with all the organizing that you have done. How do you motivate yourself to keep going? Because I know a lot of people kind of feel right now it's too much. I have to disengage, which is obviously not, we can't do that. But how do you kept yourself going, for the decades that you've been organizing?
I think there are three kinds of things that help me keep up my spirits. In part, it is the friends and the people around me. Tonight, before this call tonight, not only was I a little nervous about the call, nervous about many things, but I was also thinking, I'm too tired. One more Zoom call. Oh no. And then I see you on it, Julie Collins with her introduction, and Julie Womack with your questions. And I feel like, oh, your spirit raises me up, as well as other personal relationships. This is a picture of my 5 grandkids. It's a few years old, but my grandkids, my friends, my coworkers. So the human relationships matter, and that's one of the things you cultivate with red wine and blue. The second is that the culture of the organization, by the way, on even the friends and other things, I'm in 2 book clubs. I'm in 2 theater groups. I do other things in life that also give me joy. But the second point is the work itself should give you joy. And if you don't, actually, I would try. It's one of the reasons I work in so many different things. I want to go to the places that will give me joy. We need to treat each other wonderfully, supportively. We need to treat the staff of the organization supportively and make sure there's health care and support for them. But there's a third principle, and this often is not said as much. I think there needs to be a strategic plan for what we're doing, so that it's not just one action in response to another. It's not just an endless battle, not knowing, are you making any progress, but a plan. Here's what we're thinking of doing. This is what we expect. Did it work? It may not, but if it didn't, what did we learn from it so we can revise our plan? And so, yes, I see Jen saying yes to a plan. It's a plan and a culture of learning from what worked and what didn't work, and not to say, oh, how could you have done that? No, okay, we'll figure it out together. And so I'd say it's both finding the joys in life and ensuring that we're in this for the long haul. So this is not just a sprint, it's a marathon. So what are the things that give us joy in life? Human relationships being prime amongst them. The second is to treat ourselves well and build a culture that's of a loving community. And the third is to have a strategic plan and match our actions to where we want to go, and we can see how far we've come.
You mentioned this earlier, and I love it because I say this to people all the time, that sometimes women, especially, tend to think that they really can't be involved. They can't lead an effort if they are not an expert in every aspect of this. And I always laugh because I say, if you want to feel superior, go to some of your state legislatures and sit in some committee meetings and hear the questions that these elected officials ask. But I am sure that there have been times, like you just said, that you have tried and failed. So I guess what would you say to women who are like, I want to do something, but I'm not sure I'm ready or I'm not qualified? Like, what would your response to that be?
Well, in part, I said it before,
But yeah.
you are the leaders that we've been waiting for. Now, alone, we may not feel we can do that, but together, we are stronger. And we'll learn from doing it together. What we need is people who can raise our voices and tell our stories. We may not know all the facts and figures, but even that, you can write them down and you can read them from a piece of paper, or you can get the expert who knows the facts, and that's important too. We are for fact-based reality and not just making it up. But what's even more important is the compelling story of what it means to you and your life. That can't be contradicted because this is about your life. What did it mean for your child to be in a school where there was a shooter or a warning about a shooter? What kind of world is this with guns without protections for our children? What does it mean to have been in a community where the water was unsafe to drink? We need a government to ensure that there is water that is safe, that there's air we can breathe, that we can have a future. All of these are about our personal lives, that we have health care that can support ourselves. Right now, there's a question of who will support Social Security and who will cut it. I'm on Social Security. It's about my life. So one of the wonderful things about red wine and blue is you prepare us to tell our own story and have confidence in that.
Well, I know that you've trained many, many, many people. So what is your best advice around sharing that personal story, that story of self? How do you talk compellingly to your friends and family?
I think it's important as we do this organizing that we tell our stories, but we fit it into a plan of action. I often talk about 4 M's, the letter M, 4 of them. And after you've told your story, after we've argued for what needs to be done, that we want to know, will you recruit members? And even those on this call, let's take a minute now, either if you have a pen and a paper, write it down, or if you're more of the modern world than I am, if you put it on your iPad or your iPhone, but to write it down. Members, 4 M's. Members, who will you recruit? You came on to this call. Is there one friend you could bring with you next time so you double the number? What's their name? What's their email? What's their phone number? When will you reach them? Make it real. Could you actually recruit 2 people? Could you recruit 5 people? And maybe only one will come, but you had one more than you had before, and we are building. We are building. So members is one key thing. The second is message. It's one of the wonderful things about Red Wine and Blue. You're prepared with the talking points, with the ways to describe the issues, as well as your personal story. So message, but what will you do with the message? Will you post it on social media? Will you talk about it at a parents association or a neighborhood club, a garden club, something else that you're part of? Will you write a letter to the editor? How will you get that message out? So members and message and money. Now, often people ask us for money, but I'm going to propose that we ask others for money. Could you write down someone you could recruit for $50? Is there anyone you know you could ask for $100 or $500? Or are there 20 people you could ask for $5? And suddenly you have 100, but write down their names. What's your plan? Each of us, we need not only an organizational plan, but an individual plan for members, for message, for money, and for movement. What's the next place that you'll show up? What's the activity where we can drive forward? There's so many things you could take on. March 23rd is the 3rd anniversary of the Affordable Care Act. That great change that meant that millions of people were now covered by health care that they could afford, and that being a woman was not a previously existing condition that would not be covered by many insurance companies. Truly, that changed with the Affordable Care Act. And whether we preserve it or not will depend on what we do. So we might show up to different events that will happen on March 23rd. And then there's the anniversary of the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court. That will be later in June, but there will be events to show up for. So while telling your story, to also see yourselves as organizers of others for members, for message, for money, and for movement.
So you're singing the Red, Wine, and Blue song about bringing in those friends. That's relational organizing. You all have the ability to influence and impact your friends and family when it comes to voting and issues. So Heather, how do you people, sometimes people get frustrated, right? Because they feel passionately about the issue. They see what the future will hold, but you can't always get all those friends to be completely invested in it. So what is your advice in terms of like, do you just kind of keep slowly going back to those friends? Do you keep having those conversations? You may have some friends you bring on board right away, others you need to work on. What's the motivation there? You know, how do you keep approaching people and trying to like spread the word about what you're doing and what is going on?
Well, we have different friends with different sets of relationships. Some may not be interested in this work, but some may want to go because they'll get a chance to be with you at a fun event. Maybe you're going to show a movie and then have a discussion after it. Maybe you'll have an outside speaker they think is interesting. Maybe there'll be food, and maybe they can help bring the food. There was a big campaign in California once, and I was in charge statewide of the food, and we had contests. Was the Mexican American food that they made going to be even more attractive than the Chinese American food that another community made, or the Korean American food, and then there was Vietnamese food. Oh, that was really something. And so everyone could participate at a different level and came in for different things. There's so many benefits of this kind of work. In part, we need to listen to people and what is it they want? Do they want friendship and community? We can provide that. Do they want additional meaning in their life and find a way, one way out of feeling depressed and overwhelmed is to feel you're doing something for others that will matter and make a difference? Is there an activity where we can bring our kids or our grandkids? And that would be fun. They can make the posters. And then there are ways to develop other social connections. I met my husband at a sit-in. This was in this was in 1966. And it actually, because it was a sit-in, we spent so much time together. After 3 days, he asked me to marry him. After 5 days, I said I would, but I'd wait a year. So there are all sorts of benefits from this work that you don't even anticipate. And while not everyone will find their partner from this work, there are human relations, there are social relations, and there is the satisfaction of knowing that by doing a small piece, we help to change this world.
Well, everybody in the chat is saying they are loving your stories and it's very inspirational. I 100% agree. I
Here's
did
a
not.
picture of me and my husband at a younger age.
And how long were you all married?
My husband died 7 years ago, so I'm very sad about that. But we were married for over 50 years. Oh, Katie Paris says, hi, Paul. Yes, Paul, my husband, Paul, loved Katie. And Katie, just what a wonderful organization you've helped to build and how it's thriving.
Well, it's beautiful that after 3 days he wanted to marry you and over 50 years married. So that's quite the story. And I do agree the benefits of doing this work, even though it can sometimes be hard, is that I have made friends with people that I would never have known any other way but for doing this work. And they are now some of my best friends in the whole world. So people are loving your inspiring stories. So I do want to know, you've, had an extensive background in organizing. Do you have like a favorite story that you've already shared a lot, but if you have like a favorite story that could be really inspiring to the people listening of something that's happened, I'd love to hear it. Your favorite moments.
There's every moment that I'm in, I actually feel becomes its favorite moment. So I actually would tell this story of I was with Red Wine and Blue last night and how exciting that was. And think about the women all over the country and some men of goodwill. So I get excited about all sorts of things. Two very different kinds of stories. One, a few winters ago, I live in Washington, D.C. now, and there was a terrible one-day snowstorm. And the snow was so high, I had trouble opening my door. And a number of you in Ohio or Michigan or other places, you know that sometimes the snow can be like that. I saw today in Colorado, there's a snowfall like that. And I actually had trouble opening my door. So the community listserv had a list of if you need help shoveling your snow, because there's a community that developed, let us know and we'll send someone over to shovel your snow. And all I wanted them to do is shovel it out of my doorway because I couldn't really open my door. The woman who came over, who loved shoveling snow, I think she grew up in northern Wisconsin. She said where she missed all the snow she could shovel. She came in, we had hot chocolate together when it was over. We've become such fast friends that we are always there for each other. She had surgery. I was there for her. I was ill for a while. She was there for me. And now we go to events together. It's like, oh, there's another event. Should we just show up together? We just have fun being together. So some of it's on the most personal level. But another story on an organizational level. After the big financial crash, when the Lehman Brothers crashed and the banks were jeopardized and people were losing their homes and millions of people were losing their jobs, I was asked to run this campaign for financial reform, to even begin to hold the biggest banks accountable, something that seemed impossible years before. The financial industry was spending $1 million a day in fighting what we were doing. That's what the Wall Street Journal said, $1 million a day. I thought we had a lot of money in that. We had just under $1 million for a year-long campaign. But because we organized, we won what's called the Dodd-Frank bill, and it became a deposit on a longer term holding the banks accountable. And now we see there are other proposals to hold the largest, the wealthiest in the country accountable, the largest banks and corporations accountable. And so one victory builds on another and builds on another. That was the campaign that Elizabeth Warren had initiated, and out of which we also won the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
So there probably, well, we've got a lot of people on this call. So I think you've been inspiring them. And I hope you guys, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat for Heather, because we are going to do some Q&A at the end. I hope you're inspiring people to want to take action. So if I am someone in my local community and I want to get started organizing, and I know you're talking about like, reaching out to the friends and the 4Ms, any other advice you would say, or, for someone who's like getting inspired tonight and really does want to start something in their local community, what would you tell them to do?
Well, in part, I'd look for, is anyone else doing it that I want to be with them? You don't have to do this all on your own. Now, if you want to do it on your own, there's some steps to take, but mostly I try to go where there's already an infrastructure. One of the great things about Red Wine and Blue is you've got people all over. So I'd go to Red Wine and Blue and say, do you have anyone in my community? If not, Red Wine and Blue provides the materials, the talking points, the action steps, the links to the programs like this and to many other programs. And I'd call up my favorite girlfriends and say, I'm thinking of doing this. I may be a little scared. I'm not sure what's going to be like, but at least we'll get a glass of wine while we're going to do it, or whatever your favorite drink is. Could be cocoa, whatever. Let's do this together. And we'll talk about it beforehand, and we'll debrief after, and we'll see how it went. And then we'll see if we want to do the next step. You don't have to commit to the entire program. You can take it step by step by step. There's a friend of mine who's an organizer, tells a story. We call it Driving to Beverly. And this was the story in Chicago. Some people, anyone from Chicago may know, Beverly is in a southwest side suburb. And we were having a meeting in the center part of the city. And a friend had to go all the way down to Beverly. Maybe it was an hour away. It's a long drive. But he was an organizer and he wanted to get a lift to Beverly. So he asked a friend, well, would you take me? Beverly's a long way. Could you take me? And said, no, but Beverly's too far, but I'll take you to the train station. So on the ride to the train station, he starts telling a life story. And it's so interesting. The guy who's driving the car says, oh, that's so interesting. We're at the train station. I'll take you downtown. I'll take you even further down because I want to hear the end of this story. So they go down. They're now getting out about the time where my friend would otherwise get out of the car. But the story is so interesting. It's going on. And now my friend asks the driver about his life. Tell me about your life. He starts to tell him about his life. And it's so interesting. He's wrapped up, I'll drive you even further. I'll drive you to the next set of subway stops, way down. And by the time they're done telling the stories, they are fast friends. and they drove him all the way to Beverly. So the point is, you don't have to start by saying, I'm committing forever. You can start by saying, I'll see how it goes. And if it is, in fact, the communal, loving experience, that you make it, soon you'll be in Beverly.
I love that. So obviously we're in very turbulent times. What gives you hope right now?
Well, honestly, you all give me hope. And I see how far we have come. I see what people are willing to risk. There are now, in every place where there's been a referendum on reproductive freedom, we have won when we organized. In every special election where there was an alternative between someone who really was for greater freedom and greater justice and greater democracy, for healthcare that we could afford, for dealing with climate, for dealing with gun violence protection. In every special election where that was a choice and that in effect was on a ballot by who the candidates were, against someone from a hateful and authoritarian alternative who even didn't trust the outcome of the election. We have won those special elections. And each election builds on it to make even a greater difference. There were Supreme Court elections in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And because we won by one vote on those Supreme Court races, it meant when the cases came up, one on reproductive freedom, one on would there or would there not be rights for working people and trade unions, we won those cases, but because we had organized. And now we face an election with amongst the greatest choices that I've seen in my lifetime, the most dramatic choices. And it's at every level. It's not just presidential and Senate and House, though I do want to see people who believe in freedom and justice win those seats, but it's also at the state level. It's at the local level. And it's also on the issues. And so I get hope when I see people telling their story, moving into action. And I've seen that when we organize, we are changing this world.
Organize with love. That was a wonderful way to phrase it. I really, really, really appreciated that. I'm gonna let Julie close this out here.
Julie Collins, when we started the call, I asked her what her story was. By the way, we always want to ask, not only tell our story, we want to hear what are other people's stories. I asked Julie. She has been an activist and an organizer since the 1990s, and she keeps it on and pays it forward. And so she's someone who, she said she's an organizer, and I said, it's amongst the highest praise I can imagine. It's someone,
and I love that. I
allowed
love
to
that.
call
I
themselves an
appreciate
organizer.
that. And I just would have absolutely loved to meet Fannie Lou Hamer. I mean, wow, that's amazing. And then you said that you were with SNCC, right?
I was in the North, it was called the Friends of SNCC, but I was with
Okay.
SNCC when we, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
We had Judy Richardson on a little
Oh,
bit
how
back.
wonderful.
So that's why I was like, oh, you must know Judy as well.
Oh, she is spectacular. We just saw
Yeah.
the movie Rustin together, which
Yeah.
very good movie about the organization of the March on Washington.
Yes, that was fantastic. Well, a lot of folks are, I think a lot of folks are getting weary sometimes about, the work and all. And so there are actually a couple of different questions, and I know you've addressed it a little bit about, how do you stay steady, or how do you overcome depression when, it seems like we fail to achieve our goals over and over. And I know that it's not always that cut and dry, because we do have little things that we do win along the way. And so I'm just, kind of curious to hear if you had any more advice for folks, because folks are really in the chat, when I'm reading the chat, folks are really getting a lot from this, and, almost feeling a lot of self-care from the things that you're sharing.
Well, you've raised many things, or the questions have raised many things. First of all, I really do believe in self-care. If we can't care for ourselves, I don't know how we can care for others. You know, it's like on an airplane, it says, put your mask on first before you put on anyone else's. The caregivers, and women are so often the caregivers. Who takes care of the caregivers? So we have to find ways to both care for ourselves and show others we care for them, not just about the work. You know, I start every morning. I'm not a big social media person, but I do look on Facebook every morning and see whose birthday it is, who I know. And then I send them a little birthday note, just a sentence or two, often with a little birthday cake and a cheer and a heart. And then sometimes I call them in my very off-key voice. I sing them happy birthday. And I don't have a good voice. I don't care. But it's if I reach them, I find out how they're doing. I may not have talked to them for a year or more. If I don't reach them, they at least know I was thinking about them. So we care for each other. It's not transactional. It's because we really care. But we also care for ourselves. As I said, I'm in 2 book clubs because I enjoy that. I'm in 2, and I go to the book club whether I've read the book or not. And I like plays, theater, so I'm in that. I walk with friends, as well as I take the work seriously. And then the other thing about avoiding depression, I really have found that I am more likely to be depressed when I'm just listening to the news and the meanness and the viciousness and the lies. But when I take action, I somehow feel I'm empowered. I'm making a difference. And especially when I'm doing it with a friend. And we do have to realize that as far as we have to go, we sometimes don't appreciate how far we have come. I'll just give one example. For years, I've worked on healthcare, all sorts of struggles around healthcare. In every previous struggle around healthcare, there was a decision not to take on the pharmaceutical companies. They're just too big. You can't take them on. Yes, you can do this change. Yes, you can provide coverage for more. And in fact, the insurance companies will like it because they get more money because you're getting more insurance for everyone. You get it covered. But don't take on the pharmaceutical companies. They're too big. But because people organized for so many years, for senior citizens, we now have insulin, which used to cost a friend of mine $500 a month.
Right.
It now is $35 a month. And the promise is that that will be extended to the entire population, not just senior citizens. And that the maximum for all the population on the major prescription drugs will be no more than $2,000 a year. And you might say, $2,000, oh, that's impossible. Well, I take several medications and it is more than that because there isn't protection, but we can take on even the biggest opponents of change, the pharmaceutical companies, the financial industry, the housing industry. We can do it all when we organize with red wine and blue.
Well, that's just, it's amazing. All of the things that you've done are amazing. Someone did ask, though, if you knew Granny D, Doris Haddock? Someone who...
Granny D, who walked across the country.
Yes.
I actually, I saw her speak once, but I didn't actually know her. I have her book. But it does say you can do it at any age. And I saw a comment, by the way, in the chat that said, well, you're nonpartisan. Well, that's fine. As I told you, I was not only nonpartisan, I was no politics. I just worked on issues. I did find, though, that when you work on the issues, you build the base. And then election day is the test of what power do you have to advance those issues. But then it goes on after election day. And so those who want to do both can do both. Those who are focused on the issues can do that. And I haven't talked about parties. I have talked about our values, caring for each other. And I look for those candidates that want to protect that caring and that freedom.
Well, I just noticed someone has mentioned a couple of times in the chat about guns, and that is actually how I got started in activism. There are wonderful groups that are out there that are working on that issue. You know, obviously we cannot work on everything. And right now we are working on, you know, the extremism that we're seeing at the school board level and in our communities, and at our local libraries and things of that nature. But that is, we do have a lot of women who cross over, who are, you know, part of some of those other groups that work on that as well. And if you don't know where or who to connect with, I'm Julie Collins at redwine.blue. Email me and I can give you some names of some folks that you can contact.
That is quite wonderful. Just a couple of things on what you've just said. One of the things I love about Red Wine and Blue is that as many of us are women with children, many suburban women, but from all over. But this question of what's happening to the school boards, when I first heard about it, I thought, oh my goodness, they're coming after us. One of my kids is a teacher. He wants kids to learn. I was interested in learning. I didn't want to be told you can't read this book, you can't read that book. And I did want to get a true version of history that includes people like Fannie Lou Hamer and includes your stories. But because people organized, and you must know this, in those school board fights, the extremists who wanted to shut down fact-based learning and shut down the minds of ourselves and our children, they were defeated in 80% of the races where they won. And the forces that won were the forces for democracy and an open society and a shared humanity. And so we won even against these enormous odds. When I first heard about them, I thought, oh no, you can't do this. We're not going to win on this. But we win when we organize.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I don't know if it would be a big story or a little story, but everybody has been admiring your quilt, myself included. I just made
There
t-shirt
is a
quilts for my
story.
daughters.
I'm so glad you asked about that. On last Valentine's Day, 4 women appeared at my door and said they're part of a quilting group of about 20 women called Wrapped in Love for Justice. This is the second quilt they made. They worked on it for 6 months. Each square is a different organization or issue that I've worked on. The childcare group is in here. Jane is here. There's one that says, may I sit here, which is what my husband said to me when I met him at that sit-in. Civil rights, Midwest Academy, our training centers there. So each square represents a section of my life. And the first one was given to a great heroine, Dolores Huerta.
Yes.
Was the organizer with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. And I was given the second quilt. So I'm so glad you asked, both because quilting has been traditionally a women's craft, but now made into both art and the politics of our future, with love at the center.
Absolutely. And like I said, I just made t-shirt quilts for my daughters, so it does take a lot of love to make a quilt. So, but I really, truly, truly, truly want to thank you so much for coming and sharing tonight. It has been very powerful. The chat has been going the entire time. We have a work chat too with Red Wine and Blue. That's been going as well. Folks really are appreciating what you shared with us, and you have re-energized a whole lot of folks. So, thank you so very much for coming.
And thank you, Red Wine and Blue. I see a question. Well, what if you don't know anyone? You're new to the community. Contact Red Wine and Blue. Julie gave out her contact information. However you learned about this call, follow through with the person you learned about the call from. Just write them back. They'll give you some information, and it's a place to start. And then you'll find what touches your heart, and you'll move it forward. It is about our values. It's about saving our lives and our children's lives and our future. And you're at the center of making it possible. Thank you, Red Wine and Blue. Thank you for me, for my family, and for the future of our country.